Welcome to this episode of the Winter Moon Podcast. I'm David,
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Joe.
and thanks for joining us again for another week. Today on the show, we're going to talk about an Immobilize Rules Forum update. We're going to break down the winning list from the LVO Invitational Series, and we're going to discuss the primary objective, Close the Pocket. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so this is a rules change. It's been in effect since the new version 260 was released, but it was a pretty subtle change, so it kind of flew under the radar for a lot of players. But it came up in a forum ruling recently, and so people sort of became aware of it. But it's a slight change to how Immobilize tokens work. Before in Legacy, an Immobilize would reduce your maximum speed, which would basically just mean that when your unit is performing move actions during your activation, you would, or outside with like a standby or something, that you would lower your speed by however many Immobilize tokens you have. That's still the case, but the way maximum speed works in the new rules is subtly just a little bit different. And so it applies to a few more situations. So a few examples are when you withdraw. If you look in the rulebook, it says withdraw reduces your speed to 1. So that means if you have an immobilized token, even if you're a speed 2 unit, right, you cannot withdraw because withdraw is a speed 1 move and you have 1 immobilized token. And so your speed is being treated at 1 in that instance, so you actually can't withdraw. Another example would be, say you have an immobilized token on you. Your opponent cannot use force push on you because that would be a speed 1 move, so your speed would be 1 in that scenario, but your mobilized token is going to reduce that by 1. The other sort of situation that is pretty common that might come up would be speed X moves from command cards, things like No Time for Sorrows or Dooku's 2 pip. Your mobilized tokens will reduce your speed in those instances. The case where it does not occur, which just has to do with the formality of how the action is worded, is when you're performing a climb. So if you have, let's say, your speed 2 and you have 1 immobilized token, even though you're using the speed 1 template for a climb, you can still perform that. You only wouldn't be able to do that if you had 2 immobilized tokens. That would mean that your speed is 0 and you can't perform moves at all. So it's a little bit different for climb, but other than climb, the upshot is your speed X moves, even if they're not move actions that are performed during your turn, are still going to be reduced in their speed by immobilized tokens, and that means you don't perform the move at all if that would reduce it to 0.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a bit of a weird one because the rule didn't change, but I would say it's fair to say a lot of players have probably been playing this incorrectly since the 2.6 rules came out. And so specifically when it comes to force pushes and withdrawals, I think those are going to be the two most common ways. And now with this change, well, I don't want to say it's a change. Now with this revelation to many players and understanding with the forum clarification, I believe you're going to see a lot of play around those tactics and in using it to your own advantage, or at least attempting to. So specifically, we used to see um, the one speed Jedi like Commander Vader and Palpatine kind of use that burst of speed going into the final round so they can sit on a point with an immobilize and protect themselves from getting force pushed off, kind of have a trump card. So now all force users can do that, even if they're speed 2. And it's actually a little bit stronger because you can move at speed 1 on your activation, but also protect yourself against force push. And then, of course, the withdrawal units that hand out immobilized tokens, like things like the Pike Whip or the Magna Guard Whip. Maybe Cad Bane is got a buff off this. So there's a lot of units out there that hand out immobilize. Maybe Den wants to take his Ambam now in melee instead of his spear. I think it's an option. So it's pretty cool. So although it caught me off guard, anytime something changes, uh, it's kind of exciting to play around with what you can do with it, because I think everybody's having fun looking at this immobilize and how they can take advantage of it.
Definitely, Joe. And I also think that um, before 2.6, players have been basing their understanding of the way that Immobilize reduces speed based on the unit speed. But now, according to the 2.6 rules, that's now not the case, especially during speed X moves. You don't use the speed of the unit, you use the speed of the move instead. I think that's just another way to sort of clarify. The other two units I think that also could benefit from this change would be Sabine Wren with her electro grappling line, which provides two immobilized tokens, and of course Boba's whipcord as well also freezes things in place.
Oh yeah.
And the idea that like I could lock someone into melee with a whip from a Magna Guard or from a pike, and then they can't withdraw because the withdraw is a speed one move. I really think that's it's got a lot of play. I think because you could um you could like charge someone off a POI and then like lock them in place and your unit leader scoring and maybe their unit leader got moved out or something like that. There's some edge cases there where you can really manipulate the battlefield and then they can't respond because of the immobilized tokens. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
remind me, Boba's whip is immobilized too. Sabine's is as well, right? They're both
yeah, she
immobilized too.
but hers costs an action.
Right, right. Okay.
As
Yeah,
they were pretty powerful before, kind of an
yeah,
edge case now where they might work a little bit stronger because it was still the case before that if you used it on a speed 2 unit, which is most things, they wouldn't have been able to move even before 260. But now, say you're in against another Mandalorian unit or something else that's speed 3, if
It
you're in
works on them.
melee with it, you can now still lock it in place, right? Because you're giving it 2 mobilized tokens. The unit's max speed is still 1, but if they're in melee with you, they can't withdraw for the same reason that a speed 2 unit with 1 immobilized token could not withdraw. So,
Yeah.
yeah, those whips are buffed in, albeit a smaller scenario, smaller edge case, but still kind of all around, all immobilized weapons are, maybe a little bit stronger than we initially thought they were.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a blockbuster change by any means. Immobilize aren't like every activation type comment or anything like that, but it's it's pretty significant. And especially if you're trying to play around it, it is a pretty significant change to the tactics and how
I
things are
think
played.
Magna whips in particular look pretty. If I
They're
were to put
looking
my finger on a unit
they're
and say
looking
this is a
juicy.
single unit that benefits most from this change, I would think Magna whips.
All right. Well, getting away from Immobilize, Nathan, do you have any lists to talk about that don't involve immobilized tokens?
Yeah, does not involve immobilize in any way. Uh, but that's a great segue anyways. This is a
Thanks.
segment that we might be returning to. So if you enjoy this little next 15-minute conversation we're about to have, please, let us know through DMs or, YouTube comments or whatever. Comments are obviously good for the algorithm. Um, but anyway, so this is a segment that we're maybe gonna try. We're gonna try this, and maybe we'll come back to it in future episodes. But it's gonna be list of the week. So our list of the week this week was the list that won the LVO Invitational Series, which was a few weeks ago. We don't just want to cover the list because there's already been lots of great content and articles and podcasts that have just sort of covered the list and covered the meta. Our goal here is not to simply cover the list and be like, oh, here's what's good right now, although we will do that. But part of what we're really hoping to do is analyze the list and talk about what makes it good and possible ways to tweak it in such a way that hopefully you feel a little bit inspired in your list building. And if whether you're playing the same faction or whether you're playing a different faction, talking about this list in a way that maybe gets you thinking about your own lists and maybe gives you an idea that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So anyway, so that's our goal with this segment, and if we were to do it again in the future. But so that's the intro. I'll break down the list, and then we'll do a little bit of a deep dive on it. This list was designed by Michael, who, like I said, won the LVO Invitational Series with this. So definitely a tough tournament to win. A fun fact here: I was reading in an article on Point of Interest is that I guess Michael has only been playing Legion for a little under a year now. So very impressive to come in and win the LVOIS. So, great job, Michael. He said maybe it was a little bit of an advantage because he wasn't as shaken by the 260 changes as the rest of us. But so here's the list. So it's 13 activations, Rebels. He had Han Solo with Up Close and Personal, Leia with Improvised Orders, Underworld Connections, and Portable Scanner, Bad Batch with Omega, Din with Comms Relay, the Jetpack, the Flamer, and the Spear, 3 Naked Rebel Troopers, 1 Fleet Trooper unit with the Scatter Gun Heavy Weapon, which is the 2 Reds and Pierce, an extra model, and impact grenades, 2 sleeper cells, which were kind of the new hotness at this tournament, with the astromech personnel upgrades and targeting scopes, 1 Ewok slingers unit with the Forest Dwellers upgrade, 1 ATRT with a laser cannon, and 1 ATRT with a flamethrower. I'm going to go over the command hand and the battle deck real quick because I think these are things that we should touch on. So here they are real quick. For the 1 pips, we have This Is the Way, which is Din's 1 pip, and Sorry About the Mess, which is Han's 0 pip. For the 2 pips, we have No Time for Sorrows, which is Leia's, and I Like Those Odds, which is Din's. We have We Do What We Do, which is Bad Batch's 3 pip, and then Change of Plans, which is Han's 3 pip. For the secondary objectives, we have Sweep and Clear, Destroy Enemy Base, and Recon Mission. For advantages, we have Cunning Deployment, Ordnance, and Advanced Intel. For the primary objectives, we have Breakthrough, Bunker Assault, and Recover the Research. So we just went through the whole list. Dave and Joe, I'm curious, what do you guys think makes this list so successful? Why was Michael able to win such a tough tournament with this list?
Well, first I want to say I envy whoever is listening to this, maybe while driving, and just it has all of that locked in their brain, and it just has this list envisioned. No, I mean, he has some really strong heroes here. So Leia is one of the best support heroes in the game, maybe the top. Um, Han Solo with the cover changes is an absolute monster at picking off units. And when you have enough threats around Han, then you feel fine running him out there because he's tankier than you think, especially when you're picking up 2 dodges with up close and personal and along with his uncanny luck. So you got the Bad Batch and 2 Rebel sleeper cells and Din charging in. Han's cleaning up red save units with his double Pierce. Yeah, I mean it's just super solid. You have a couple ATRTs to help you line of sight block. It's just a great list. He even threw in 1 scattergun fleet trooper, which is, you know, they go down quick, but again, he has so many threats. You're not going to want to shoot those fleet troopers, right? You're going to be looking for the sleeper cells first. So he just has a lot of short range threats. I couldn't find the VODs on. I wanted to watch at least 1 game of his. I couldn't find it, just to see how he kind of plays it. But I would imagine this is a list he played very aggressively, getting into POIs, and I'm sure it did very well in that. So, yeah, I mean that's my take on why it was successful. He has a lot of really strong units and very versatile mobile units.
So the 2 big things I'm seeing is I agree very much with Joe. So the 2 big things I'm seeing is the command staff. I call the operative and commander set the command staff or whatever. It was just my name for it. Those this combo of Han, Leia, Bad Batch, Din is just really powerful. There's a lot of specific reasons for it. Like Din Djarin with comms relay is going to get his independent, for example. Leia with underworld connections can issue orders to the Bad Batch and give them a free move, for example. Han Solo, change of plans, a 0 pip. And then, of course, Din. Sorry, let me back up. Han Solo with a 0 pip, extremely strong, just winning priority. And then having Leia to improvise if you pull the wrong token. There's a lot of synergy here. Portable scanner, of course, getting the 3 dodges out to all your heroes or to the sleepers even. Having the Beskar spear and the flame projector. So, like, for example, Leia with Underworld could No Time for Sorrows Din into a melee, and then Din's got, the Beskar spear flame projector combo that he can do. Omega lets Bad Batch contest at range 1, which means they can contest very safely. That's something that no other unit in the game can do. And then, of course, you've got sleeper cells, which are, for 79 points, you're getting a lot of dice. They're just really powerful. I think they throw 12 in this configuration with targeting scopes now, because they cost only 79 points. Really powerful unit. Laser RT gives the impact you need. Impact grenades on the fleet troopers. Also, putting impact grenades on a surging unit, extremely powerful. ATRT flamethrower, just having that one-off flamer and then of course Din's flamer as well. If you encounter like the 112 B1 list, like it's going to make that list very sad. If you encounter Ewoks, it's going to make them very sad. And then the other thing that I noticed about this list is that it's 13 activations, and 13 is a really good number. A lot of lists out there right now are like 10 or 11, but this doesn't seem to make very many compromises to get to 13. A lot of lists have to make compromises to get to 13. This one does not. Rebel troopers, they can still contribute at range 3. They throw 4 black, like that's not nothing. The fact of the matter is they're also agile and nimble. So they're not easy to remove if they get their dodges up. So I believe this is like math from a long time ago. A nimble dodge rebel trooper is basically the equivalent of red saves. Like it turns on red saves for them if they get a dodge token.
And unless you can one-shot it. Yeah,
right.
Mathematically, it's like red saves.
Right.
Maybe even a little bit better if it's chip damage.
And then the last one is the Ewok Slinger. Like the Slinger is just massive value for points, and it gets a scout and a dodge round 1 because it has forest dwellers. Like, there are just so many good things about this list, and they're all crammed into this like 13 activation monster list. Now, I think we might want to discuss the relationship between the list and the battle deck, like what we're seeing. Bunker Assault, he has the ability to split. He has really powerful hammers in Bad Batch and Din. Recover the research, he can spread out with ATRTs. Like he can sit an RT in the back, for example, and then an RT up front, and then spread out with the Rebel Troopers and the Ewok Slingers. Those guys are like specifically for capturing objectives. They're not really there to contribute, although Slingers, they throw a pretty good dice pool at range 2. And for very cheaply, for 38 points, you get 6 black dice. Like that's a really good deal, mathematically. And then Breakthrough, he's got a ton of activations to secure points, and it's going to be tough if he deploys all on one side and just swarms you with 13 acts. Like, how are you going to hold your point if you split? Like, he'll overwhelm you on one side. Like, there's a lot of really, really good stuff in here.
Yeah, it's an interesting. So 13 is like the magic number. I mean, to me, it's like you have more than the vast majority, and the other people running. I mean, most lists are like 11. I feel like is the average,
right?
And
the ones I run are 11.
You're gonna get the last 2 activations of a round fairly often, even with the pass system. So I think 13 is just such a good number for acts if you can get there like this listed with, like you said, David, without compromising. And what's really interesting about this list, you highlighted like the splitting, is I think it splits very well, just with sheer numbers and the couple power players that it does have. You put Han on the correct side where he's not going to get one shot, but he has red saves to pierce. You put you put your pieces very strategically. It splits very well, but at the same time, on something like Bunker Assault, you don't want to walk into this army of 13 acts sitting next to each other either. So it can do both very well, and Den can be that linebacker if they do have kind of that queen piece on their side. Den can get in there and 1v1 them, or at the very least muck them up enough rounds for your army to win.
So kind of to maybe put a summary on some of the things we're seeing. So for one thing, there's just a lot of activations, and that combined with what the activations are makes it very good at running up and sitting on objectives and scoring VPs early. We see that there's a lot of offense here. Not, not super tanky, this list. There's not even though there's a lot of acts, there's not that many wounds here. Besides some bad batch, they're like the one tanky piece, but there's a lot of offense here, so it can kill things. And then it's able to split. This is not a list that has to stay together. Part of it's that there's two commanders, so you're not worrying about courage bubbles. And there's not a lot of things that have to be together to get their synergies. There are synergies with the command cards and things, but you can issue an order at infinite range. So it's really easy for the army to split up in really kind of any configuration you want it to. And there's some fast pieces here. Din, he can get somewhere quickly if he needs to. Han and Bad Batch can both shoot while they're moving. So they feel pretty fast on the table. They can get from point A to point B while doing damage quicker than most units. So that seems to be some of, to summarize it all, kind of feels like that's where the list's strengths are. And that's what it's trying to do is get fight on all the battlefronts it needs to, split up, get on the POIs early, overwhelm you with a lot of offense, powerful characters, and just rack up that score on you, the victory points, before you have a chance to respond.
So, Nathan or Dave, whoever wants to go first, but if you were to stay true to Michael's list here, and say, keep it 95%, to throw a number out there, 95% the same, what small tweaks would you possibly look at making, either that you think would just generally maybe feel a little better to you, or at least fit your play style?
I am not a huge fan of Leia. I know Leia is really cheap, and I know the Rebel officer is not as cheap as he used to be. But I would probably drop Leia down to an officer and take a third sleeper. That's my first
Upgrade,
thought.
upgrade
Yeah.
the Ewok Slinger to a sleeper. Would that
Yeah.
be enough points? You probably have to cut something else somewhere.
Yeah, you probably have to cut something else, but
yeah,
that's just my thought. I might also drop Beskar Spear for Amban rifle.
And to be fair, he was playing before the Immobilize ruling was on the forums.
Yeah, that's not the only reason. I would also take Din as a training, right?
You just like you like the Ambam over the Spear even without the Immobilize.
Even without the Immobilize. Immobilize just a cherry on top.
I think his Amban has Immobilize 2 on it, so
it has Immobilize 2. Yeah,
kind of locked people down even before.
For sure.
It's the cherry on top, but I think the real thing is that Din could use a CZ initiative on Han's 0 pip. So you get a 0 pip flamer.
Yes, I like C's
on them. Yeah, well. C's would be good on Din here. So I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of what David said. I'm also not a Leia fan. I mean, No Time for Sorrows is really good. And her offense is actually decent now, and she hands out a butt ton of dodges. It would be cool to get a third sleeper in there, but I'm not going to hate on the Ewok Slingers. They're pretty insane value for their cost. I think 2 things that I would maybe do differently if I were building this list is I would change the Rebel Troopers to the Naked Rebel Troopers to Naked Fleets. Now, there's a couple downsides. You lose the range 3, which is obviously going to be useful a lot. And, you lose the nimble, agile combo, so fleets are going to be easier to kill. But I love that those Naked Fleets have charge, and I love that they throw 8 dice. That's pretty sweet. I love Naked Fleets. So that's a me thing. I would probably get at least a couple Naked Fleets in there. And then I think I'm going to steal this one from you, Joe, because you were mentioning this before, but I'm of the same mind. I think on the sleeper cells, as much as I love targeting scopes, if there were 8 more points in the list, I would leave those. But if we're just talking about point for point changes, personally, I think emergency transponders are more important on the sleeper cell, specifically because they can remove suppression. So if you're in a situation where you need your sleeper cell to be able to move and shoot something, which usually you want them doing, right? And your opponent is able to get a cheeky suppressive shot on you, or say Krennic plays his 3-pip, or Vader Master of Evils, something happens that's difficult to account for, and you get 2 suppression on your sleeper cell, you want to be able to guarantee that you can move. And emergency transponders do that. And then if you get into position and you're already sort of where you're going to need to be for most of the game, and you're not worried about the suppression, and you just really want to nuke something, a second aim in that moment is going to be better than targeting scopes. Obviously, over the course of the game, if you were to use targeting scopes several times, that value would accumulate to be worth more than an extra aim. But I think the flexing ability of being able to get the extra aim if you really want to nuke something, or what I think is most important, to get the suppression to make sure you get that move. Personally, I would take transponders, but that's a pretty small nitpick.
You
Yeah.
notice that every list now brings its own terrain.
The ATRTs.
Yeah, and just about every competitive
A
list
lot
these
of
days
lists
brings
do.
their own
Yeah.
terrain.
Aquas, buses,
Yeah.
ATRTs,
Door
So
spiders.
in my
spiders.
experience, ATRTs are not super great at blocking line of sight. If you've got 2 of them and you run them right next to each other, maybe you can hide like Han and Leia back there or something. It's harder than you'd think to hide even one model behind an ATRT and actually really block it from all angles, let alone a multi-model unit. So I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to call ATRTs bringing your own terrain the way you can for like a bus. But I'm sure if we had Michael on here, I'm sure he could tell us that there certainly were times when the ATRT blocking off line of sight was
I,
useful. But I wouldn't
with
imagine it's a common tactic.
yeah, and with 13X, I don't know that his ATRTs were like really relied upon for line of sight blocking.
Right.
To be completely honest, if you play your range bands right and you get last activations like you want, you almost just oversaturate with threats, and it might not matter a whole ton. But I want to steal a couple tweaks from both of you guys.
Okay.
Well, first I want to steal back my emergency transponders. Yeah, and just to echo that, I think you get more value off the targeting scopes throughout the course of multiple rounds. However, I believe the hedge against that when you do have 2 suppression to guarantee 2 actions is pretty big, and or you take the aim otherwise, and getting that aim on the round where you want the aim the most. Like a lot of the times there's one big attack. That's the important attack. Maybe there's 2. So yeah, I do like it, but again, it's 60-40. It's not a huge deal. Here's what I would like to see, and actually this goes with the line of sight block. I would want a third ATRT to help me line of sight block better, because I would want to leverage that more. So I'd try to squeeze in a flamer. I'd trade the flamer out for a fleet trooper. What that would allow me to do is it would give me a few more points. I love environmental gear on Han Solo. I don't want him to be slowed down by difficult terrain. That's 2 points there, and I have 5 left, which is your seize the initiative on Den. And then it's, chef's kiss to me. I mean, it's already a really great list, but like that would be my tweak. But with that tweak, and then I wanted to ask you guys this, I also changed a command card out. I don't know that I need comms relay on Den, to be completely honest, because the only card I care about is his 1-pip. And when Den's playing his 1-pip, he probably wants to have his order control. I get rid of I like those odds. That's Den's card, right? Yeah, I get rid of that card and I take Reckless Diversion. I think Reckless Diversion is one of the strongest command cards in the game. Han Solo's 3 command cards are amazing, and he has a good setup. The Ewoks are an amazing unit, right? You stick the Ewoks behind the ATRTs, scout them out there, triple move. I mean, you almost place standing order. You make sure they have order control on turn 0, on turn 1, and now you stick one dude in front of the ATRTs and the rest of them behind it, and they have that one dude gets shot at, and they take one wound at a time, right? So if you can pull it off with the terrain, like that is one of the most powerful effects in the game. And what's following up behind them? All your biggest threats coming out when they want to safely. So, anyways, those would be my little tweaks. But I really like reckless diversion. But I'm just a fan of gimmicks, so maybe that's just it.
Well, an easier one to pull off, like obviously, the dream scenarios like you described, reckless diversion. For those who don't remember or haven't heard it before, is Han's 2-pip command card that means you have to, your opponent, if they're able to, has to shoot one of your units that has a face-up order token, right? So if you play it on the Ewok slingers, which have 6 models, and you can cohere in such a way that only one model is visible, and then your opponent would have to shoot the Ewok slinger, but the most they can do is 1 model per attack, right? So it's definitely like a cheeky thing. It can be a little bit hard to pull off in practice. If you can't, let's say you can't pull off the dream scenario, an option that's still really good in my opinion is just sticking the order on Bad Batch, because Bad Batch is a tank. They have 10 wounds of surging red saves, and the whole rest of your army, aside from Din, is white saves. So let's say you got your sleeper cells, your fleets, your slingers, everything in a position to go hit, and you don't want your opponent to just vaporize a sleeper cell before it gets to go. Well, if you have Bad Batch out there, it's going to take your opponent forever to chew through Bad Batch, and Bad Batch isn't even your hardest hitter. You're mostly taking Bad Batch to be able to score, to be able to threaten these objective scores, right, with the extra range band. And so if Bad Batch sits there and just takes a bunch of hits while your sleeper cells, your Ewoks, Han, while all these people get to move in without any fear of getting bothered, like that's still pretty dang good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did want to highlight one thing because wait, who wanted to take fleets? That was you, Nathan. You like the
Yeah, I
naked
love naked
fleets.
fleets. That's
So
a me thing.
I
I
also
do
vote
as
for naked fleets.
okay. Well, to play devil's advocate, halfway devil's advocate is, and just something to think about when you're list building out there is you don't have to take all of one or all of the other. You don't have to take
Nope.
4 fleets or 4 rebel troopers. And I think there's a world where on this list, maybe you just want to switch one of them to fleets, have that extra charge. Maybe you can squeeze them in impact grenades because I think those work fantastic on the fleets as another armor hedge, and still have 2 rebel troopers for that tankiness, that flank objectives, that double move them in and sit on the POI and hope you live type stuff. So you have more versatility. I'm always a fan of versatility. I don't, unless the list is just like so synchronized and humming on all cylinders. Like I like to have options. So I might go with a mix of them.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. Maybe that's what Michael's philosophy certainly here could have been, right? He's got the 3 rebel troopers, but he also has a fleet trooper. I mean, he clearly was kind of going for a mix. So
Yeah. And anti-impact here, I think he's actually good. The fleets with the impact is a nice little hedge. You have the laser cannon, and you think that's not very much. The sleeper cells and the Bad Batch push 5-6 wounds into armor 5 units, like not like fairly consistently, right? Um, Bad Batch probably 4, more like 4.5 ish when they have their aims. Sleeper cells probably more like 5. Yeah, I mean maybe I'm overshooting a little bit, but
yeah,
the upside is definitely there. They can push wounds into armor.
for sure. Yeah, no, sleeper cells and Bad Batch just hit so hard. They hit as hard as something with impact
Yeah.
3 or whatever.
Before we
Yeah.
get too far away from it, just to circle back to reckless diversion, Han, you'd have to take the underworld connections off Leia and put it on Han, because that's
Yeah.
the only way Han gets orders to
Yeah,
Bad Batch or
or
Slingers.
you'd have to find you'd have to put a second copy. Yeah, I
Right.
thought about that after I
Small point.
mentioned it, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
worth noting. You'd have to have underworld connections on Han.
Yeah.
No, for him to order Bad Batch.
For him to order Bad Batch.
Right.
Or the Ewoks?
The Ewoks are mercenaries.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
Ewoks are
I think
mercs, yeah.
that's an easy switch. That's an easy switch.
It's not hard to find 5 points.
I mean, you love. Here's the thing about the combo with Leia is Bad Batch double moves out to where they're within a half a range, a speed 1 move of a building, of a line of sight block. They double move out, get a powerful shot. You think they're exposed. Maybe they're overextended. Now no time for sorrows them right back behind the building to start the round. Something like that can be really good. Or to position aggressively with your fleets with the scatter gun or something so they can charge in on something, right? It changes the math. It can catch your opponent off guard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, No Time for Sorrows is fantastic.
Yeah, it's really good.
That's definitely a big reason to bring Leia if you're going to bring her.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's how I would have made it my own. This list is great. So I'm not saying my list is better by any means, but that I probably would have tweaked it like that. But this one's inspired me. I'm actually looking at IG, squeezing IG in instead of Bad Batch and doing some different things, but similar feel.
I want to do this with CIS. I want to try to make a Geonosian hammer list with 13 acts.
I think you can definitely do something similar with geocentric lists. This idea of just having a lot of offense and having a lot of ability to contest objectives quickly while still throwing out that offense. Geos are great for that.
And what I think is really underrated on CIS is the BX commandos with Fibro swords and the Saboteur mine, because they have the Scout 3, they have the jump, they're super mobile, they can do a little pot shot at range 3 safely, and they charge in and they pack a punch when they charge in.
They really do.
Unfortunately, with the Magna buff to Immobilize, maybe the Magnas are just too good, but they're competing on a similar wavelength now. For sure.
Magnas are tankier. But
they have pros and cons. There's pros and cons, but they're both really good.
We might talk about this on another episode, but I really do want to break down a CIS list, and because I played in a tournament today. Little brag, I won. And I won with the Geonosian list, and I just really want to break down CIS at some point. So for everybody listening, because I think CIS is really, really good right now. And there's many reasons for that, but we'll probably get to that in another episode of the podcast.
Absolutely. Make General Grievous great again, David. Good job.
To sort of close the segment, kind of the last question I had, and maybe we've already touched on some of it, but what are the lessons that people at home should take away from this list? When you're building your list, whether it's something like this or whether it's something in a completely different faction with a completely different style, what are still some of the lessons that you can take away from this list?
Okay, so no command card in this list is a dud. There are 0 duds.
Yeah.
I was gonna say every unit has a purpose, even the cheap naked ones, right? Like every choice seems very deliberate and well formulated. And so that, I mean, think about that. Don't just pick the thing to pick the thing. Pick the unit, pick the upgrade, and say, okay, when and where is this going to come into play, and how do I use this? Plan A, Plan B. How do I leverage this unit? And go through that thought process, and you might find that there's a better choice as you see how it kind of synchronizes together. Harmonious.
Walk softly and carry really big hammer units. Like Bad Batch is a big hammer.
So, yeah, all right. Yep, to sum it up, I don't know how this list won. He must have rolled a lot of white saves.
Boo.
Props to Michael.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Congrats again, Michael. Well done. Good list. And like I said before, if you want to see us keep doing segments like this, please let us know.
Awesome. Well, we got to move on to our main segment. Dave, you want me to take that away?
Please do.
All right. So we're going to stick with this series of talking about the primary objectives. Last week we talked about intercept signals. This week we're going to move on to one that maybe is a little more simpler, a little more straightforward is probably a better term. Close the pocket. If you're old to Legion, it's set up like intercept the transmissions, right? So you have one POI directly in the center, and then you have your two side POIs equidistant on that center line going across the board. Starting in the second round during each end phase, players score 2 VPs if they secure the center stockpile and score 1 VP for each non-center stockpile.
Yeah, so something interesting about this objective is that, like Joe said, there's only 4 points per round, and this is a lot harder to tie on, right? Because that middle is worth 2. So the only way to tie is if you're scoring the middle and your opponent is scoring both flanks, or if nobody's scoring the middle, or if nobody's scoring anything. So most of the time, what's going to happen is one person is going to be scoring theirs, and one person is going to be scoring the middle, and the other person is only going to be scoring theirs. That's how it's going to be most of the time. It's going to be 3-1 most turns. And the way this map is laid out, right, it's really all about that middle. And there's not, maybe you have some tricky plays in mind where you send a flanking unit to sort of attack their back point. But again, that's a little bit less rewarding in this objective because the middle is worth more, right? So a lot of times it's about that fight over the middle. So you want a list that is going to dominate the firefight. You're looking for power. You're looking for tank. You want to be able to set up across from your opponent, and you're going to shoot each other, and you're going to win.
You want to put an ATST on the middle point and stand veers behind it and guidance a standby on it.
Yes, yeah, gross stuff like that. Things that are going to be hard to remove, that are going to dish a lot of firepower.
Big tanky vehicles are great at the center point, also because they so easily get out to the center on turn 2 and get to do their thing and get to shoot, right? So yeah, I would say big tanky vehicles are great. Really, I think tankiness is really important in this one for the center point, especially if you are going to go. And we'll talk about maybe some different strategies here in a minute. But if you're going to try to score that center point early, activation control, tankiness, and and maybe even activation count, having more than your opponent, are all super good.
I think force push is also phenomenal on this objective.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're really fighting over that middle, and just being able to remove something from contesting by force pushing at the end is extremely potent. Well, changes the math.
If you've got Vader, if you've got Anakin, you got Dooku, if you've got like a force user that can just own an area of the board, then this objective is great because there's one area of the board that is worth as much as the rest of the board combined.
Yeah,
so if you got units that can do that, this objective is great for them.
I go as far to say that if you don't fight over the middle, you can't win the game. Like I don't really see how, and I've played this one a handful of times, and that's not my most played objective. I don't really see how an army that splits and wins both the left and the right side and doesn't try to win the middle successfully does that very often. I think you almost have to fight over the middle and win it at some point in the game.
Yeah, so this played out. I wish Brian was here this week because Brian and I played Close the Pocket recently, just a couple weeks ago. But yeah, kind of what can happen if you spread too far. If you try, if you're trying to threaten, say, both flanks or whatever, your opponent can kind of just ball up in the middle, take that, and then they can just identify whichever side is weaker, and then they can just push on that side and just and get rid of it. So it's if you're going to go for the flanks, and again, the thing is, having 2 flanks is not as rewarding as having a flank and the middle, and it's hard. It's just hard to maintain having your opponent's entire blob in between your army that's cut in half. That's just it's hard to hold that ground. It's a lot easier to have yours and then fight over that middle.
You mentioned starting out in the middle, and I probably should have covered this when I covered the objective card. The deployment zones on this one are a bit unique compared to the others, is that you have split deployment zones. you have about a range 3.5 band on the left side and a range 3.5 band on the right side. And you actually can't deploy in the center of your board, or at least the deployment zone's not there, right? And so, yes, you can start in the middle by deploying closest to the center point as you can and moving straight towards the center. But the other interesting thing that comes with that is you can get very close to your opponent to start the round by deploying on the side of the board, right on the short edge of the board. You can come out and get range 2 shots to start the game if you're ultra aggressive and your opponent puts his units there. I'm not suggesting that's the strategy, but that is an option. You can get really aggressive really quick.
Oh, I agree totally with that, Joe. Like, I actually use that today in my games. Like, I use my Geonosians to do that. I would deploy off the short edge. This was
Yeah.
on a different objective, but it's the same concept. Using just having that tactical option available and just keeping it in your back pocket, so to speak, in case your opponent deploys a little too aggressively. You can then deploy off your short edge, say like with any unit with steady, for example, or Geonosians, which are kind of the special case because they get a free jump. You can always like pounce on them with your range 2 guys and try to do some damage early. That's usually a good call.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're looking at turn 0, we talked about deploying, Nathan. When you're looking at turn 0 setup, all right, you start the round, you start turn 1, and you start putting your units down. Do you like to split them in the zones? Do you like to go after one side of the board and take control, move to the middle then? Or just kind of depend?
So for me, and I mean, obviously a lot of this depends on the list matchup and the terrain and what your opponent's up to, right? But I generally like to pick a side and sort of establish that as my side and start moving a lot of my things toward the middle. Again, if you're playing this, hopefully you got tanky units. You got things like B2s, Black Sun, clones, right? That's kind of the thing. Hopefully you have stuff like that, and you're taking these heavy hitters that are going to be able to move in and deal damage while still being able to take damage, and you want to start moving them towards the middle. Now you mentioned that. Part of the things that makes this interesting is, like you said, the absence of the middle deployment zone. That means it takes you a little while to be able to contest that objective. A lot of things are not going to be able to shoot round 2 and contest the middle on round 2, right? Even if you have the range, it just takes a lot of, it takes more than 3 speed 2 moves to get to that center point. So you got to be extra fast, or you got to have scout, or you got to have, something that's getting you up further. But so, yeah, you do want to be moving up on that point aggressively. If you're too slow to get up on that middle, I mean, if you can't get basically your entire army there by round 3, you're really in a hole. Because if your opponent scores that point rounds 2 and round 3, even if you're winning the firefight, the best you can do now is tie the VPs. Now, that's a
Right.
strategy you can do, and we'll probably talk more about this later. But this is just an objective you got to be careful on about making sure you're being conscious about managing your distances to that middle POI. You're not going to get everybody there on round 2, but you really got to set it up so you can get basically your whole army, besides whoever's on the back point, right? But your entire army that's in the fight, you want to make sure they can get there on round 3 without having to frantically double move and lose your opportunity to attack.
I think you can afford to lose the middle round 2. You can afford to lose the middle round 2 if you feel like you have the firepower and the positioning to take over the game. Maybe you tie it round 3, fine. You win at round 4 and 5, you win the game.
Yes.
Losing the middles turn 2 and 3, now you can still win. But you need to be dominating at that point, right? And
Yes,
so
that's a tricky position to be in.
I wanted to mention, maybe this is a good time to bring up a general concept that might apply to multiple objectives, but I think it's specifically really important here on close the pocket, and especially on turn 2 as you're figuring out, should I try to score this round or should I not? And I guess for lack of a better term, I kind of call it the cat and mouse game of how many units do you have that could possibly score? How many units does your opponent have that could possibly score? So if on turn 1 you position, let's just say a standard trooper unit that's speed 2, you position them just exactly at range 2 of that center POI, so you know on a full double move they can score. That's one unit that you possibly could get in there, right? So then as turn 2 is developing and you're counting your opponent's units, okay, he has 5 units that are in range of score, I have 5 units. Well, Nathan, when one of your units, when you decide to play it safe and stay back and take a shot, now you only have 4. Now I have 5. Okay, now do I take advantage of those numbers and start going in, right? Or do I still wait it out, right? Because you don't want to
Mhm.
put your guys in a risky situation. But I mean, by golly, if I got a naked core that can double move in and win me 2 VPs, those guys are going to get blown out of the water, but I'm going to get my 2 VPs, right? So
Yeah.
it's a kind of a cat and mouse, because if everybody goes all in, you tie 5-5. But the first person who doesn't risk sending a unit in is now a numbers. It's a numbers game, and they're now one behind. And
Mhm.
then you got to make that judgment call.
Yeah, so this is, I think the question you posed is kind of the art of the whole objective, right? It's how quickly do I push in and how do I weigh scoring right away versus maybe getting a superior position in the firefight. So I'm going to tweak your scenario a little bit because you asked about what if we're tied 5-5. I'm going to say that actually in a lot of real games, that might not even be the scenario. Like we were just analyzing a list that was 13 activations. Now, a lot of lists, particularly lists that have tankier units that want to run this objective, they may only have 10 or 11 activations. Your opponent is probably going to be a situation. Say I was playing something like B2s. My opponent was playing something like Michael's list, which his list probably doesn't want to play this one as much. But let's say it's that scenario, right? He's got those naked rebel troopers, those Ewoks. He's just got a bunch of stuff that can just sprint up to the point that don't really care about attacking, and he's going to be able to do it with more things than me. So, like in your numbers, let's say he has 8 units that can score, and I only have 5. Well, at that point, he's going to win either way, right?
You concede that, and you
Yes.
try to win the fight.
Exactly. So I'm going to maximize. I'm not even going to try. I'm not even going to worry about double moving a single unit to the point. I'm going to attack with everything because he's going to win no matter what I do. And so if I'm sending a B2 and it's double moving to make it 3 units to 1 instead of 3 units to 0,
Yeah,
that's
that
a
doesn't
waste,
help.
right?
Yeah, it's
That's
a
a
waste.
waste. So you want to. So if he's going to win anyway, you just attack with everything, and those naked rebel troopers that he sends out there or whatever, you blow them up and make sure that they're not scoring on round 3, which is when the rest of your B2s can now all get to the point together. And now hopefully you've killed enough things that you can tie it or maybe even win, right? If it's going really well.
Dave, in your tournament you just played, you said you played close the pocket. Sounded like more than once. 2 out of 3 games, or?
No, I didn't end up playing close the pocket, but I played
Oh,
a
okay.
similar objective. But
Gotcha.
I totally agree with what Nathan is saying. Like I think Nathan has it. Like um if you literally cannot, if there's no possibility of you winning that point, you just have to just go ham and start attacking as aggressively as possible. And this is one of the reasons I really like 2.6 is because it rewards aggression. The old version of Legion did not reward aggression. It rewarded what they call defensive play, which is basically sitting on your hands and waiting until like a long range unit can thump you with like 3 aim tokens.
Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it used to be.
And I do want to add, when you decide that you don't have the numbers, so that cat and mouse game is out the window because you just don't have the numbers. You still want to very deliberately position your units when they're attacking, right? You still
Yes.
may want to move forward knowing that you're within a speed 2 or a speed 1 of scoring next round. Moving and shooting is like the name of the game. Like, if I can say there's one thing, you want your army to be able to move and shoot at the same time, because the POIs are so important nowadays and how you win Legion.
Yes, yeah, that's a really important point. we talk about, because you have to get your units on the point round 3. So at round 2, you want to make sure that your units are one move away from scoring. And you want to make sure you have enough room for all of your units. You don't want to make sure that all of your units can, you have the tools out and the things, I'm just barely going to be able to get my unit leader to touch the edge. If you're doing that with all your units, you might not even have enough room.
You might block
Them
yourself
all
out.
in, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you can very comfortably have everything you're planning on scoring be able to score. And so that means that round 1, your stuff needs to be 2 moves away from scoring, right? So you got to be managing this distance round 1, and then round 2, right? You got to make sure you're only 1 move away, and round 3, you have to be on that point.
Okay. So there's 2 more POIs. There's 2 more POIs, guys. We've only talked about the middle. Let's talk about what to do. What is the appropriate measures to take to ensure you're scoring at least one of the flank POIs? Because you have to score at least one, even if you have the
Yeah.
middle, right? You don't want your opponent to score both flanks with minimal effort because you went 100% on the middle. That won't work.
Right. So things to watch out for are if your opponent has more activations than you, and or you've gone with all your heavy hitters early, and if they have fast units. So you really got it. So to say they've got Geonosians or swoop bikes. Maybe you're in a position where you're winning the middle. It's going well. But now so your opponent sees, I'm not going to win the middle this turn. But they can still muck up your plans if you've only got 1 unit on your back point and they've still got 2 Geonosians that haven't gone yet, that are maybe those Geos are close to the middle, but now, if they triple move, now they can hit your back point, and now it's flipped a point. So maybe you did get the middle, but for this turn, they now flipped it, and instead of you winning 3-1, now it's 2-2, and that can really mess up your plans. For example, if you took a loss on a turn 2 or round 2 rather, so right, you don't want your opponent to be able to upset your game plan like that. Even though they're probably not going to hold that back point long term if they do that, but them doing it, and if it surprises you, that can really throw off your game and mess up your plan to get those 12 VPs.
Or you throw a unit out there and like an ARF like snipes it with Echo.
Yeah, and ARFs like we were talking about. You also got to watch about suppression. If you've
Yes.
got a Courage 1 unit out there, you have to make sure that your commander is range 3 of that thing. So don't have your Courage 1 unit on the far side of your POI and your commander, far away on the other side of the middle. You got to make sure it's range 3 and that your commander is going to stay alive. And then
Right.
2, you don't want, you talk about ARF sniping, but even if, let's say, your opponent has something like a bunch of B1 E5Ss, you don't want them just to be able to chip that thing, or let's say hit it with a couple suppressive E-webs or mortars or range troopers or
Right.
something. Like you don't want to suddenly get that unit to 4 suppression, and now it's not going to score that point anymore. Even losing 1 point, if you're not prepared for it, can be pretty devastating.
Speaking of suppression, I wanted to talk about 2 advantages that are extremely powerful on this objective: strafing run and ordnance. This is an objective that has a really high tendency to cluster, and both strafing run and ordnance are area weapons, and those area weapons are extremely potent on this objective. And generating that suppression, like you were talking about, to panic something with a strafing run on the last round. We actually saw this at LVOIS, where there was like a question about whether the strafing run was going to be able to panic units so that the center POI would flip. So just something to keep in mind is that strafing run is a really good advantage on this objective. So when you build your battle deck, think about, if I do run close the pocket, if I do want clusters of units, like tight clusters, I probably want strafing run in my advantage deck, and I probably want ordnance as well.
That good point with the strafing run too is on those flank points, and to Nathan's point as well with the commander at range 3. It can be easy for your commander you need your commander to score the middle point, so he runs in, and now he's not in range that side POI, and you have a B1, you think you have a freebie sitting back there scoring, and the strafing run steals that VP. That could be the difference of the game.
Yep.
So yeah, you got to keep that in mind. And if that's the case, you maybe have to commit a stronger unit than a B1 that can't so easily, either a vehicle or can't so easily be panicked on their own.
Something like Decas.
Deca,
Are
I
great.
mean vehicles. Decas are
Yeah,
great.
ATRTs, and to be
Yeah,
clear, probably cheap vehicles is what we're talking about. If you got your
Right.
ATSD, you probably don't want that sitting on your back point, right? Even though it, could still shoot, but you want it
it's
to be close
yeah, it
enough
could
to
still
where you
affect it.
can.
It could still affect the center potentially.
Yeah, an ion spider.
So
Yeah, Ion Spider would be good.
I was talking with Brian and I played this one. I don't remember the matchup, but recently here, and we had kind of talked about strategy. So I'll I'll take a couple words out of his mouth, but he essentially said people split their armies into both deployment zones, and he thinks it's wrong. So hopefully I'm quoting him correct. Um, his general sentiment is that he wants all of his army on the same side. He wants to dominate the side point as he moves towards the middle, and then he can commit appropriately what he leaves behind on the side point. But he kind of swoops in, wins the side point, annihilates what's ever there, comes to the middle. Maybe he doesn't win the middle until turn 3, but his entire army is there. And if his opponent made any mistakes and committed the wrong numbers and got them trapped, those guys are wiped out. So that's how he likes to play it. I generally agree with that. However, I try to keep my opponents on their toes. I like when I deploy, I always want my opponent to at least think I'm trying to do something that I'm not, that's not in my plan. So I tend to always try to, depending on matchup, depending on list, it might not be possible, but I try to feint my opponent. So for example, put out my first of my first 4 or 5 units. I want to put 3 or 4 on the side I'm not going to play on, but I would want those units to be units that are mobile and can move over to the middle more quickly than others, right? And so now I put a few units on the side I don't want to play on. This is probably based on terrain. What's more advantageous terrain wise for me versus my opponent. Now my opponent probably is like, okay, I'm going to match you. You're going to put 3. I'm going to put 3. I'm going to start stacking my army here because I'm going to put them all on one side. And boom, now I switch my last 7 or 8 acts, all stack them on the other side. And those units, they just run away. They just let you have it. But now, hopefully, maybe you've committed slower units, less mobile units, more powerful units to a side where they won't affect the game for a few turns. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You gotta, because you never know what your opponent's gonna do, right? And so different opponents might have different lists with different game plans. So you gotta be able to adapt, and you gotta make sure that you're committing enough to your point that if they are splitting, to make sure you can deal with that. One thing you want to be careful of is you don't, when we're talking about this idea where you move up, you sweep, you take your flank, and then you push in towards the middle. You don't want to overcommit to pushing into your flank because again, you want to make sure your units by the end of round 1, again, you want to make sure that they are 2 moves away from the center.
Ideally.
If there's
Yeah.
something that doesn't,
Ideally,
triple move.
unless you're playing Commander Vader and like 6 snows, like I played on Close the Pocket once, and then it's like 3 turns of sprinting full speed to even get to the middle, and I was like, "Oh, this is not good." And the worst part is it was my objective for my battle deck, and I was like, maybe that wasn't the play." So I learned a lesson on that one.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
Yeah.
you want to make sure you have enough units that are even fast enough to reach the middle, by round 3. But yeah, if you get in your head like, oh, I'm gonna sweep, my opponent's got like he overcommitted to my side. He's got 2 or 3 units. I'm gonna move in. I'm gonna punish him by killing those units, taking my side. He'll get the middle round 2, but then I'm gonna come back, take it round 3, and I'm gonna be up on attrition. Right? That sounds good on paper. Make sure you can actually reach the point on round 3,
Something I thought
because
of
it's
is
easy to accidentally mess that up if you beeline it straight for your
yeah,
points. You kind of want to move diagonal, and so
right, yeah, yeah,
you got to think about terrain, right? You got to make sure your terrain's not gonna, because sometimes there's a big mountain that's like right in the way or something, right where you'd want to be moving. So If you're going to go around it, make sure whichever way you're going around it, make sure you can reach that middle point by round
Yeah,
3. Or again,
absolutely.
if you're going to try to score early, round 2. Should we talk about that? Should we talk about when you want to make the move and score early? Because we've kind of talked about the
I
other
think
side of it a lot.
I think we kind of hit on it with the cat and mouse versus you have more. If you have more, you're probably trying to score early. If you have less, you're probably conceding that fact and trying to gain activation, advantage, and attrition. We didn't say that in so many words, but I think we kind of said it without saying it.
So here's, I guess, let me ask a more specific question.
Okay.
Here's what I had in mind. Let's go back to the scenario where it's like, the 8 things that can score versus the 5 things that can score. And now let's flip your point of view. So you're the person with 8 things that can score. How many of those things do you move into scoring, and when do you do it?
I only move what I have to, and I only do it when I'm going back to the cat and mouse example I gave. So if I'm up 8-5 and I happen to draw one of those 8 units, I'm probably playing it safe, unless it's like the ideal tanky unit that you just like, dude, shoot this thing if you want to, right? I'm probably playing it safe because I'm still up 7-5, still up 6-5. Okay, now you've lost one. I'm up 6-4, right? So I'm only moving in what I have to. Now, once you move in, I'm up 6-4, and you move one of those 4 in. Okay, now I know that I only have one more wiggle room to work with, right? So I want to make sure I beat you. Now, there's a risk, trying to be that, I don't know, cute with it. There is a risk because one of those you move in, boom, their last activation blows them out the water, right? And they get wiped off the board. And now maybe you've tied it, but those are 2 VPs that you could have had otherwise if you didn't play it so, if you didn't cut it so close.
Right. And
But
you got to
I always use
manage.
that cat and mouse example as I don't want to commit more than I have to.
I think the principle what you're saying first off is 100% correct. You don't want to, because if you're unnecessary, because you want to be killing things too, even if you're the person that's 8-5 and your plan is to score early and to hold as long as possible, you still want to be killing things, right? So if you're 8-5 and you have the chance to shoot something instead of running onto the point, and again, you're 8 things that could score versus 5. Well, yeah, well then do that because you're gonna want to shoot as much as you can. And then once your opponent goes with one of the things that could have scored, it's like now you have more license to do that, right? You want to watch out for a couple things like suppression. If you got courage 1 stuff and in your head you're like, well, I have 8 different things that can double move onto the point. Remember, your opponent can shoot those things and can suppress them. And then if they only get 1 action, they're not going to reach that point anymore.
And let's say they have a range 4 unit, like they have those ARF troopers, right? What those ARF troopers can do? They can split fire, and they can throw a suppression on multiple courage 1 units. So now you thought you're up 6-4, and all of a sudden you have 3 naked core with a suppression on them. Well, math says you're only going to roll one of those 3 off minus some other keyword interactions. So that can really throw off the numbers. The suppression is huge. I think suppression in 2.6 is bigger than it's ever been in Legion. I think it's very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was actually going to add to this by just saying that, like, if I have the chance to go first and suppress something, if suppression does in fact matter, which in a lot of armies that are good right now, suppression is mitigated pretty heavily. Whether that's like because you're taking droids or because you have courage 3 or you have guidance or some other thing that gets around suppression. If I have the ability to suppress something when it matters, I'll just take that chance.
Suppression is like, yeah, it's almost like taking. I'm going to take the guaranteed thing. Yeah, I might not kill him, but like it's a VP. If I add two more suppression on him, it's a VP. Why wouldn't I guarantee that, right?
Exactly.
And I actually ran snows again, inspired by Brian here. I ran snows with sonic grenades, okay, and a heavy weapon. So I had 5 of these in this army, and oh my goodness, like by the end of turn 3, I had Bad Batch on 9 suppression. I had 2 sleepers on 6 suppression each because every snow was double moving in, and I was triple splitting my fire, right? And so it's 1 suppression here, 1 suppression there, 2 suppression off the grenade. The next snow runs in, and I just won the game off suppression.
Yeah,
it was crazy. It worked very well.
Yeah, one one thing I want to circle back to. So we're talking about managing this count, right? That's where we're talking about suppression.
Right.
You've got X many units that can score, and your opponent has Y. Those units that can score, generally speaking, now obviously there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, those units that can score this round, you want to hold those no matter which side of this coin you're on, whether you have more, whether you have less. You want to hold those as long as you're able. Not necessarily that you have to give them orders or something. You might have more than you can even hand out, right? But if you're, say you've got 6 core and 4 of them are in a position to double move if you want to, and 2 of them are not, go with the 2 that can't first, because you want to keep that number as high as long as possible.
Late in the turn.
Exactly.
You want to keep it late in the turn.
Right, because you want to see what your opponent's going to do.
And I would take that even as or add on to that by saying, and usually that's going to be turn 2. Sometimes it's turn 3. Sometimes no one will score turn 2 on this in the middle. So whether it's turn 2 or turn 3, when you know it's going to be that, okay, someone's going to start committing here, playing a higher pip command card that turn, if possible, depending on what your armor's doing, to get last activation or get last 2 activations that's probably the most important turn to do it. Once the fighting's already started, once the dust settles on that initial blow in the middle, then going last and going first isn't as important, because everything's just diving in at that point.
I'd say going first is good. Getting the when you're in the middle of the scrum,
once it's already there, going first
is good. Always good, right?
Sure.
If you're facing a Black Sun or whatever, and you've got fleet troopers with Pierce, you want to hit that Black Sun before it has a chance to vaporize.
But you want to go second, Nathan, when that cat and mouse is going on, right?
And the cat and mouse go second. Once you are both on top of each other in the middle, you want to go first.
You play your most powerful card. You're not worried about
exactly.
when
you play whatever your most destructive command card is, which most of them are 1 pips anyway.
Right. You bid to fight first with like cunning or with some other high pip or some other low pip card.
On with the 0 pip.
So now if you've listened to the cast, then you won't lose your next Close the Pocket game. Unless it was also to someone who listened to the cast. Then it's 50-50.
So we'd like to thank everybody for watching the show. And if you're listening to us on as a podcast on Substack, you can please check out the Winter Moon Wargaming YouTube channel where you can see the video. And if you're listening to us and watching us on YouTube, please visit wintermoonwargaming.substack.com and check out the blog and all the written stuff there. We'd very much like you to subscribe over there for free. And if you're interested in any of the paid content, you can, of course, become a paid subscriber. It's $5 a month.
And we're looking for any and all feedback. So, David, what's the email that they can send feedback?
Yes, the email. So it is Wintermoon Mailbag. It is all one word @mail.com. If you want to send us an email for show feedback, questions we could answer on the podcast, any of that stuff, Wintermoon Mailbag @mail.com. All right, that wraps up this episode of the Wintermoon Podcast. I'm David.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Joe.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.